got right up on the window, and he happened to catch a wisp of smoke coming out of the corner of the window frame. And it was pissing out of the corner under pressure.
Yeah.
So he opens up a very disciplined, softball-sized inspection hole. Flame instantly appears in the inspection hole. So I get on the radio, engine 1 to command, chief, we got fire in the walls. We need to line up the 2. Now all of a sudden that little flame that just appeared in the hole now starts blow torching out. So let's say I get back on the radio and I call for that line with a little bit more vigor this time. Now that thermal balance is starting to drop down to my shoulders, and I go, everybody out of the room. So my driver's anchored at the door, and I tell him, all right, bro, I'm the last one out, close the door behind us. And I hear, bro, there's no door. You gotta be shitting me. And now the smoke is like halfway to the floor at this point. And as I'm scanning the room, I caught the closet door, and I said, bro, I'm like, get over here. I'm like, we need to get the door off its hinges. We popped the door off with the Halligan bar, and now of course it's a closet door. So now it's not ideal, but it's what we have. I'm literally like just hunkered down, holding the door and watching the thermal balance just continue to drop down. And again, the senior man being so heads up, he flew down the stairs, intercepted the line from the other engine company, passed it up the stairs because he knew the last thing we needed was more bodies up there. He hops on the nozzle. I get behind him. We boogie in, and it was like that. As time goes on, and fire duty dwindles for most of us, we need to rely on the storytelling. And when I can't impress it upon guys enough that on our job, when there's a fire, you better be picking the brains of those guys that were there to figure out, what they had for conditions, what they did, what worked, what didn't work, if there was anything unusual that happened, because you're getting that secondhand experience. Right.
All right, we good? We ready? Everybody's happy? All right, awesome. Hey, everybody, Jeremy with National Fire Radio in the studio tonight with Rob and Tucker, and of course, a good friend of ours, Lieutenant Nick Papa out of New Britain, Connecticut. Nick, thanks for joining us tonight, brother.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Pull that mic right up to your face, because Sebby gets crazy about the volume and so on. But anyway, I mean, this has been a long time coming.
It has been almost a year.
It very much so, because we met New England Fools. You spoke last year at the New England Fools Conference, which is next week, a year from next week, so a year ago. And I want to dive right into it. We'll get your story, but I want to dive in why we latched on and we came up to you afterwards. After hearing your lecture and your training that you did, was you are a man that talks about ventilation. Nobody talks about ventilation.
The pendulum has swung hard.
I love it. I absolutely love it, man. In a world of the fire service today where we are always talking about how great it is to be a truck man, right? Everything's truck. Nobody ever talks about the engine. Finally, a guy like Brian Butler comes along, starts talking about like urban engine company stuff, right? And the OGs of engine company. But like every single piece of content on social media nowadays is truck company driven, right? But ventilation is a massive part of truck company operations, but it's not talked about, right? We talk, VES, ground ladders, aerial placement, search, right? All these things. But we take for granted that everybody knows how to open up a building and why we open up buildings and when we open up buildings, right?
Absolutely.
We sat through your lecture at New England Fools Conference. Rusty up there throws a great conference, and
sure does.
I really sat back and I'm like, this is fantastic, because there was a lot of great nuggets of truth in there that people don't really talk about. Rob, you were there, man.
No, it was awesome. I like it wasn't just like talking about ventilation. It was you going over like real life experiences that you had in New Britain, or like there was a couple of videos. Actually, it was a really cool moment of that one video from FDNY.
Oh yeah.
When the one guy's like that, it was his uncle or
his dad?
Dad, right? His dad.
His dad, who's since passed.
Right?
It was the gentleman from up in Maine. I'm terrible with names the first time.
Yep.
But it was one of those it's a video from the early '90s from Queens, and it was 155 truck in Jamaica, and they're working a private dwelling job, and you see the two guys that are operating on the porch, and waiting to take the glass, and you hear the radio transmissions back and forth between,
great
the engine and the ladder, and then the window gets taken, you see the fire light up a little bit, and then seconds later the line starts working, the fire's out. I mean, it's a beautiful textbook, coordinated operation. And when the video's going, all of a sudden you start to hear some kibitzing in the back of the room. And I was like, guys, what's going on? And the guy stands up and goes, "That's my old man." And I go, "Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
So
But like, not just real quick, like
Shoot.
the pride from him, like he was just
he
so
was beaming.
like
He was
like
beaming.
just like so happy to see his
I got
dad,
fucking goosebumps.
and
now.
just like it was
yeah.
like it was awesome.
But the best part about that was then, Nick, you as a humble gentleman as you are, you allowed him to talk about it. Talk about his it was an awesome experience to be in the crowd and to just sit back and basically put your class on hold for like 10 minutes and just had a conversation. That was cool.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you brought that up. So I make a habit in my classes to make sure that there's full disclosure in the beginning, that everybody knows that it's an open forum,
right?
That there's just as much learning on my part as there is on theirs.
Yep.
Because I don't like to use the term teaching. I like to use more the term. I like to say we're sharing information.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. We're all here together. Everybody's bringing something to the table, and we're having a conversation.
Right.
Just like what you like to call this here is having a conversation.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what I always do in those instances, if somebody's going on a tangent and is kind of taking themselves out of their comfort zone and is speaking in front of the class, I'll sit down. I make it a point to sit down with everybody else in
they're
class,
listening to
so
them.
that they know that they have the floor. And I make that a point of doing that because, again, it levels the playing field, because we tend to put the instructors up on a pedestal, at least in the class itself. And I want them to know that I'm just a fireman like you. This is what this is all about. We're here to share with each other and to make ourselves better. So it was really incredible to hear the story, to see him literally beaming with pride over his old man. And he had a pretty storied career too. And after the class was over, we got to have a sidebar, and
I eavesdropped on that.
Yeah. So he showed me he had a brass bracelet on, and it was one of those metal clasp bracelets that don't connect all the way, and that typically the guys have for memorial bands.
Yeah, right.
I've seen a lot of 9/11 ones out there.
POW type stuff.
Yes, but his was made out of brass. So I'm looking at it, and it had an inscription on it, and he's showing it to me, and it's got two Maltese crosses, and it's got a 7 and a 155, and then it's got his dad's name on it. And he said, "You see this right here?" He goes, "This brass that this bracelet's made out of is from the brass fire pole out of Ladder 7's quarters in the Lower East Side that my dad started out on."
Wow.
So apparently when they were either redoing or they were relocating the firehouse, they were taking the poles down, and one of the guys that worked with his dad called him up and said, "Hey, we're making these bracelets out of the old pole. Would you like to have a piece to have made up for your dad?"
That's awesome.
And it was incredible. So the story gets even deeper too. So when his dad was on 7 Truck back in the day, if anybody's not familiar with the Wonder Drugstore fire, the 23rd Street fire, Ladder 7 was one of the companies that got decimated during the collapse.
Right.
And his dad was it was him and one other member of the 6-man crew that drove home on the ladder truck that night after the fire.
Wow.
The four of the brothers on their crew didn't come home that night. So, it's just, hair's standing up on my arms talking about it right now. It's just the incredible story that was such a monumental moment in fire service history.
Oh, that, absolutely.
That fire is why we have Vinny Dunn.
Correct.
Because if anybody watched the documentary, A Good Job, that Steve Buscemi did, basically Dunn kind of says that was basically my way of dealing with the post-traumatic stress.
Exactly.
That he was emphatically writing. He'd be up all hours of the night just writing article after article after article. And it didn't dawn on until decades later that he goes, "Wow, that was me dealing with the stress of that incident and having that survivor's guilt." Because, again, for anybody that doesn't know the story, Dunn was a lieutenant on 33 engine, I believe, and when they arrived on the extra alarm, and it was Engine 18 had got there just before them and reported to the chief literally seconds before Dunn did. And they got the assignment to go in, and they got sent around back.
Yep.
And that was that fateful assignment that they went down when the floor collapsed because they were over the top of the basement fire and because of the terrazzo floor.
Terrazzo floor. That's what I was going to say. That's what it was.
They didn't feel the heat coming up from underneath.
Yep.
So it was just amazing because Chief Dunn's been a idol of mine because I've always been a voracious reader, and back when there was only Firehouse and Fire Engineering magazine to read, the internet was in its infancy, and there was no internet content for the fire service. It was magazines.
Yep.
So I'd be a teenager in the day room of the firehouse.
We talk about it all the time.
Digging through the boxes of old magazines to read Dunn's articles, and that was. He was one of the inspirations for me to start writing, and because I read his stuff, and I would love to have this kind of an impact and be able to give back to the fire service. And you look at him, and he is one of the most iconic fire service educators,
without a doubt.
In modern time, hands down.
I agree.
What I found so special about that moment, though, is I remember taking Instructor 1, and my fire service instructor at the time, McClellan from PG County, he was like, hey, be careful with what you show, because one day you may have somebody in your class who goes, excuse me, that's my video. And you're going to have to be prepared to deal with that. Yep. But for this, like I said, that moment in that class for this guy to be like, that's my dad. And you to sit down and give him the floor and kind of just put everything into perspective. And what was awesome about it was I was like, oh, I'm on the edge of my seat here. Yeah. But looking around the room, there was not a single person in that classroom who was like, this guy's talking. Even the other instructors were like, this is awesome.
But that just adds to who you are, right? I mean, we're 10 minutes in, 5 minutes in, and I know more about you in the last 10 minutes than I've known this. But no, but I mean that. It's incredible how passionate you are about this, and the fact that you're willing to have that open forum in your classes. I mean, you bring a lot of knowledge to the table, and we're going to talk about a bunch of different things that you're doing in your classes and so on. But you bring a lot to the table, and you have a lot to talk about and a lot to educate through experience. And then to be able to be humble enough to sit down in your own class because somebody else has something to say, and you're willing to share that spotlight in the floor. That's what the fire service is all about. That's what this is. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And to have that back and forth, I have to think that in your career is going to be one of your highlights of teaching. I can almost guarantee it. To have that interaction with that you had, and to be there was cool. To watch it all go down, I mean, it was a super cool moment, and I think everybody got a lot out of it, and it not just the lesson of who he was and the storytelling behind it, but also the fact that we can all sit around and share stories and listen to it for the commonality of the better good for all of us. I mean, I love that.
But if anybody's read Sebastian Junger's book, Tribe, it's so important for people within the fire service to read that book because it's all about the fraternity.
What is it? Which one?
It's called Sebastian Junger.
Okay.
Junger. It's a short read, but it's an excellent read.
It's called Tribe?
It's called Tribe. And what it's about is just the tribal concept of society, right, and how that influences culture, and how as time has progressed on, we've gotten further and further away from that tribal mentality and that sense of community.
Yep, I agree.
And as technology has progressed, we've become more and more introverted.
Yeah,
we're not communicating with each other anymore, face to face. It's all done through electronic. Sure. Which for me is there's probably a lot of people listening that have no clue who I am because I have a very small social media footprint. And I like to do things old school. A lot of people don't like it, but I tend to call people. Yep. I like to talk on the phone versus text.
I do. Yep.
So I
had that same conversation with a friend today. And, how we have the possibility of actually, phoning somebody and looking at them, but nobody uses that technology, but everybody's texting one another. But you don't hear the inflections unless you're talking to them.
Right. I agree. I agree with all of it. And I think, but it truly is that double-edged sword, because I think there is value in today too, though.
Absolutely.
in means of communication and so on. But I agree with you 100%. In the fire service, the one thing we can't do is become introverted. The one thing we can't do is get away from community. I mean, we have to, that's what it's all about. It's all about community. And when we start to veer away from that, when society starts to be able to grab hold of the firehouse, the kitchen table, the front bumper, the responding to a job, of being able to communicate with each other because we've lost track of that, we're in trouble.
100%. So the nice part about that book is it just reinforces why it's so important to have that sense of community, to have that sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And it goes into, why there's such rampant PTSD now, but why other countries where their countries are engaged in continuous combat, that their soldiers aren't coming home and dealing with the same levels of PTSD that our soldiers are. And it's not so much what they saw, it's what they're coming home to. And it's the sense that when they come home here, there's such a huge disconnect between what our soldiers are doing and sacrificing overseas, and they just, it doesn't resonate with the vast majority of the population here. So they're not truly appreciating what you'll get hey, thanks for your service, but there isn't that true appreciation or even understanding of what they went through, whether they saw sustained combat or not. And he talks about how the Israeli military, so many of the people in their country go through the military because a lot of countries.
So it's a rite of passage almost,
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of countries in Europe,
choice.
when you become of age, you have to do a stint in the military.
Correct.
Right.
So over there, almost everybody has either served in the military or for them, the war is in their backyard.
Yeah.
So they understand what war means and what's the costs are, so they're able to truly support and empathize for their soldiers and what they're sacrificing in their service. And it just really resonated with me, and why that's so important for us, whether you're in the service, whether you're in the fire department, or just in our everyday lives, and why it's so important to maintain that sense of community, and even if it's just within our individual family units.
I love connecting. I love connecting the commonality of every day to the firehouse, and the disconnect of, we all complain about society these days and how out of touch we are, and lack of discipline and lack of respect, and all of that, right? But the same things are happening in the firehouse, right? Yeah. And I draw these parallels because I don't digest a lot of other people's content, but there's one or two podcasts that I listen to that were instrumental in me starting this. And they kind of gave me the permission to try something and to dive into something like, National Fire Radio. And I digest their content all the time. And it's funny to capture the disconnect. And I do these Instagram talks every once in a while. On a Sunday night, I'll do like throw up a 1 minute thing, like just not inspirational, but just a outright like candid 1 minute discussion about like something that's in the firehouse. We got to change it. We got to do better. Get off the sideline. Get in the game. That type of shit. And there's so much validity to the firehouse, to today's society, and trying to. There's so much commonality between the two, that the problem is though is the firehouse was always separate from the everyday outside.
Yep.
And now more than ever, it's the same. Right? Where we used to go to the firehouse, and we turned everything off. We went to the firehouse. We were at the firehouse. Nothing else mattered outside of the firehouse. And I think that had a lot to do with the sense of community. We're there for the betterment. We're there for each other. We're there for the customers we serve.
Oh, it's also the brotherhood and the family. It's
all of it.
The whole
all
family.
Of it, right? It's the community,
firehouse.
right? But then now it's all about me.
Right.
Now it's, what do I get out of this?
Yeah.
Why you know what I did today? I did all this. What are you guys going to do for me? Type of thing. But that's becoming more and more the norm, unfortunately. But I want to check that book out, man. That sounds fantastic.
It's a great read. And
How old is that book?
It's within the last couple of years.
Oh,
It's
okay.
not as old as you.
There's not much that is.
So I'm gonna go on
Dinosaurs
a
got
quick,
one up on
quick
Tucker.
tangent.
Do it. Let's
I'm gonna
hear it.
go on a quick tangent here.
Yeah.
So there's so much we can control within our own sphere of influence, whether you're the senior firefighter, whether you're a company officer, or maybe you're even neither of those. There's so many little things that you can do that you can kind of steer that ship, and it could even be really passively too. So one of the things that I did in my company, we have I'm so blessed that the house that I'm assigned to, it's a double house. I'm downtown. It's the engine and truck with the shift commander, and we've got great guys. They're all, hard hitters. They all want to be there. They're great firemen. We've got a really good mix of time on the job. But one of the things that I did was every Sunday that we're on shift, we do a brunch in the morning.
That's perfect.
And I did crepes one day, and for anybody that's made crepes, it's a long process.
Time consuming.
It's very time consuming
absolutely.
because you can only do one at a time because it's quick, and then there's a whole all the fruit, and there's just a lot.
Oh, you got to
there's
get the pan to the right temperature, and it's got to
Right.
stay at the right time. I mean, I get it.
So here's the deal: because there's so much prep work, guess what I need to pull this off?
a lot of guys.
I need a lot of guys.
Yeah.
So guess where everybody is?
It's awesome.
For the first 2 hours in the morning on Sunday, we're in the kitchen, busting balls, having a blast. Usually there's music going, or something's going on, and it's just the banter back and forth. And I always try to make complicated meals like that, because guess what? The more complicated the meal is, the more help I need, the more guys that are in the kitchen, and the more the more
putting the team together.
Exactly. And again, it's that kind of, so if you're not in a position of leadership, if you will, or authority, and you don't think you can control or steer that ship to where you want it to go, it's all it takes is a little things like that, where you're kind of flanking everybody, and it's like you're drawing them in a way that's so kind of behind the scenes,
I love it. I love it because I do coffee. So if we have a run before 9 a.m. in the morning, we're going to Dunkin' Donuts, and the companies will go, and my engine will go, and next thing you know, the truck from across town will show up, and then instead of just going back to the firehouses and breaking down, now we sit outside on the patio at Dunkin' Donuts. Not only does the public see us, and you engage kids coming through and so on, but we get to sit around, and you got, 8 guys or 10 guys or 6 guys sitting around telling some stories and sharing a cup of coffee for an extra half hour instead of just racing out of there. And to me, those are those important moments. I love that. I think that bolsters the sense of community, and that's how we teach the younger kids that there's more to it than just going to do the job and then go home.
It gives people the opportunity to be firemen too, because that's each one of us had an opportunity where we encountered that engine at Dunkin' Donuts, hanging out, interacting with the kids.
Yeah.
And there's times where I see people shy away from the public, and I'm like, you're missing out. You're missing.
Yeah, you need to engage
of this job.
Yeah. So Nick, let's do this, man. This has been fantastic already, but I want to hop in. Let's talk about who you are. Nobody even knows. Not that nobody knows. I mean, what I mean is we didn't even do an introduction.
A spade.
Come on, out of here. That's not what I'm saying at all, brother. You kidding me? Listen, this is gonna be your 4th year at FDIC teaching. I mean, it's not like you're not on the national stage, so let's not play those games, right? But ultimately, Nick, give me the rundown, man. I know. Well, go ahead. Tell us who you are.
Again, how did you get to FDIC?
Yeah.
Who
Who the hell
invited you
are
in?
So I'll start from the beginning, and I'll get to talk.
So I was born.
Yes. So I'm a 2nd-generation firefighter. My dad was a volunteer. He grew up in Hartford, and then when he met and married my mom, they moved to the next town over in Weathersfield. He did about 10 years volunteering there, and then they settled in the town I grew up in Newington, which is sandwiched in between the city I work in, New Britain, and Hartford. So he volunteered there for 25 years. Yeah. And so basically from when my first moments,
all your memories,
all of my memories have been centered around the fire department. And thankfully that during the time when I was growing up, the Newington Fire Department was very vibrant, had a great culture, and I got to spend a lot of time. I mean, any chance I got to get out of the house and tag along with the old man, I grabbed at it, and I just was a sponge. I was into everything. I mean, I was hanging in the back at drill nights trying to pick things up, and going to calls with him. And then as I got older and hit my teen years, and then when I got to join the fire department as a cadet at 16, and then started to get to ride the fire truck. That was a great experience, and hit a lot of hydrants, and got to do some overhaul, and even snuck my way in a few times here and there, you know.
Now,
but
in the cadets, was that through the
fire department itself? Yeah,
But
it wasn't
is-
through
is
like the
that a
Cub
Boy
Scouts.
Scout?
No.
That
It was you were a full-fledged member of the fire
Okay.
department. You just weren't you weren't interior. So Connecticut, it's
what we have as juniors?
yeah. So Connecticut's strict certification system. So I mean, you're not interior unless you're firefighter 1. So I was still able to ride the trucks to emergency calls. So, I was kind of like the dedicated hydrant guy, then would come in for overhaul after, because I mean this was before we knew what we know today, and it's when as soon as the fire was out, it was let Nicky come in and let him hook some ceilings. There's still be smoke hanging down and snot's running down your face, but it was.
But listen,
I had a blast.
that's all part of it.
Yeah.
So I got a great story before I forget about it.
Yeah.
So I turned 16 years old, and my birthday's in the summertime. So it was a beautiful, summer evening. It's literally my birthday, and I had managed to con the guy that was in charge of swearing people in to come down to the firehouse on my birthday, which was like
I love it.
My dad will probably laugh when he hears this, but I'm the type of person that when I set my sights on something and my mind's convinced, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. Come hell or high water.
Right.
So this guy lives a couple blocks from the firehouse, and I get the old man to con him to come down, because my dad was the company captain at the time. So I get him to come down. He swears me in right in the apparatus floor. No bullshit. Within minutes, the bell hits for first due structure fire. So
persistence pays off, everybody.
Yes.
That's what we're getting at here.
Yeah. So I get to so the engine. The engine, of course, fills out, and the ladder at the time was I think it was a 87 open cab Suffin Tower ladder.
Nice.
So I get to hop in the back. And,
It doesn't get any better than that.
So I mean, just to set the moment. I mean, it was one of those hot summer nights. I mean, you're sitting back in those old leather seats. You could smell the leather, and I mean, you could as soon as we got a couple blocks away, you can smell the job, and you know you're going to work. So my dad had actually gone there on his own and took command of the fire. So not only my first night getting sworn in as an actual member of the fire department, my dad was in charge of the fire. And so that was pretty wild, and it was
that's a great story.
Yeah, so it was a split level house, good bedroom job, and then I got to go in afterwards, open up with one of the senior privates, and it was blast. So that was where it all began, and I did.
And how many years ago is that?
So that was back in 2003.
Okay, so 17 years ago, and you have a grin from ear to ear right now.
Yeah.
But I love that, man, because those are the memories that make us who we are, right? Yeah. Like, I remember, I could tell you, just like you, I could tell you all of it coming through it, because I grew up in it too. And I remember my first fire, and I remember being sworn in, and I remember, like, all of that, man. And
what we were doing at the beginning is we were asking people, and when you guys interviewed me, what was your first fire? That was really the first question they asked.
Yeah, but I love it, though. And I'm sitting here 17 years later, you're sitting here with a smile from ear to ear. And I just know, because that means it's left such an impression on you.
Yeah.
And it made you who you are today. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so fast forward now. So where are we today?
So fast forward. So 2 years later, I become a full-fledged member of the fire department, but I go off to college. I went to University of New Haven for their fire science program.
Oh, right. Yep.
But school was not my thing. Yeah, I had my sights set on getting on the job, and while everybody was just enamored with college, I just wanted to get on the job. So I drove to Providence and took their test. I took New Britain's and Hartford's, and everywhere I could test, I was trying to get on the job. And then while I was going to school, I went through a combination fire 1 and 2 program right at New Haven Regional Fire School.
Nice.
So it was great. I mean, I got to spend my weekends in fire school, and then every chance I got, I was running home, in which my parents hated because they're paying for room and board at University of New Haven, and I'm running home to hang out at the firehouse.
Yeah, I get it.
Oh, you got to run your job,
to run calls. So that was my thing. And luckily, my number got called up very early on. I was just about to turn 20 years old when New Britain called me up and said, "Hey, report to Station 4 next Tuesday and pick up your gear, and you're going to the fire academy." Wow. And I remember it was this old crusty lieutenant, and he goes, "Hey, are you a volunteer?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "You're not anymore." He goes, "Make sure." Make sure you're done with that before you start." I was like, okay, yes, sir.
Yep.
Done. So that was the end of the volunteer career. And, I said my goodbyes to Newington, turned in my stuff, and that was it. I turned 20 years old a week later, and then went off to the fire academy as a baby.
Wow.
I couldn't even drink in the fire academy. So yeah.
Mom and dad okay with you getting out of school?
They knew the deal. And I mean, of course my mom was,
because I struggled with this. I mean, this is one of my huge personal struggles that I talk about on this platform. Is I had the ability to get hired, but I was in college and felt indebted to stay. Mm-hmm. So I deferred the job, Yeah.
My mom, of course, was worried about it because, my whole family up to, my sister and I, nobody had graduated college. We were just very much a blue collar family, and it was super important for us to go to college.
Absolutely.
My sister is a speech therapist, so she went off to college, got her master's degree, and all that jazz. So
how did you? I just want to interrupt you real quick. How did you handle? And I don't want to say a disappointment because it doesn't sound like you disappointed your mother at all. But like, there's that pressure. Be like, hey, we want you to go to school. We want you, because I know a lot of kids out there, and I say kids like just as a general description, but they're in school. These opportunities come up, and they feel like like Jeremy said, they have to defer. Like, did you have any kind of internal struggle with that, knowing that there was I don't know if pressure is the way to put it, but like you wanted to get, like your mom had one thing, but you were like, you had a very clear path and you saw it, and nobody else in your maybe outside saw that path.
So luckily, with my dad understanding the dynamic, and unfortunately, my dad had a couple raw deals of getting on the job, and he was in a class action lawsuit for Hartford way back in the day, and he's a mechanic by trade. So when he was in the lawsuit, and he opened up his own shop, and the shop was doing well. I think my sister had just been born at the time. They were starting to build their family. The business was taking off, and he was like, you know what? He goes, I don't know what's going to happen with this lawsuit. And we're spending a lot of money in legal fees. We're trying to, the business is starting to go.
Listen, I get
so
it,
he
man.
pulls out of the lawsuit.
I get it.
And then, within, I don't know how much time it was, but it wasn't that far after, everybody got hired off that lawsuit that was in it. So that was kind of his first blow. And then, he came out number one on some other tests, and, due to some, I'll call it political issues, he didn't get hired. So he understands how finicky the getting on the job can be, and how when your number gets called, you got to take it.
Right.
So the one thing with my mom, it was like she was so apprehensive about it because she knows how easy it is once you leave school to not go back.
Right.
So I made the promise to her that I would go back, and a couple of years later, after getting on the job, I went back. I finished my degree, and then went on to get my master's degree. So she was very happy about that. I mean, she still talks about that all the time.
Not bad for a guy that wasn't in the college, right?
Yeah. Well, so
you got fulfilled, right?
So
so exactly.
I found my niche. This is how I got into writing. So I found my niche with writing through when I went back to school. Nobody really had. University of New Haven, unfortunately, didn't have their online program off the ground yet. And there was no way, with the way the overtime was, we were working the old 10s and 14 schedule. So I was, 3 on 3 off, and I was crushing the overtime. So there was no way I was going to be able to make it work. And then, University of New Haven was just too expensive for me at the time. And now, of course, they offer up, here's a nice plug for UNH, but they offer an incentive. If you're on the job, they give a massive discount for people that are on the job, and they offer online programs.
Is that for Connecticut residents? Or
no,
anybody?
I think it's for, don't quote me on this, but I'm sure, I think it might be inclusive to anybody on the job.
Cool.
That's a good plug for the school.
Yeah. So, I mean, the program was tremendous.
It is a great program.
It is a tremendous program. And it's done nothing but grown since I left. There's some great faculty there, and I had a wonderful experience there. I wish I could have finished, but my number got called, and I wouldn't change anything for a second. I mean, I always joke while my buddies were shotgunning beers up at UConn, I was crawling hallways. That was so that I couldn't be happier. All I wanted to do was just get on the job, and fortunately, my number got called early, and that's
fantastic.
Yeah, I got pulled up in New Britain, and that was it. So with the schooling, though, when I went back online, everything is self-study. It's all guided. So they basically tell you, okay, this is what you're responsible for reading. Here's what you need to contribute to the discussion board. So it's not just, you reading and rote memorization, and so you can regurgitate it for a test. it's all on your own. So not only do you have to read, but you have to comprehend, because then you have to contribute to the discussion board and have a cogent, conversation with the other students. And then all of your assignments, there's no tests. It's all papers. So it's all, you have to take what you learn and constructively apply it in a paper. So that's when I realized that I had a knack for writing.
For your writing, yeah, absolutely.
And it was funny to kind of dial back a little bit, but when I was at UNH, one of my my 100 level comp classes, I had this hard ass comp teacher, and he was a business writer, and people hated this dude. I mean, he was one of those guys that people dreaded getting.
Yeah.
I got along with the dude. But he pushed, and he had unwavering standards. And if you didn't meet it, he was dinging you. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And this was a 100 level class that everybody had to take. So I, wrote some papers, and he would write in there. He's like, God, I wish you would pick up a dictionary, or, I wish you would learn some grammar, because you are, you have a thing for writing. In our capstone paper, we had to meet with him midway through the report. And I sat down with him, and he's going through, and he's reading my stuff, looks at me, and he kind of like grimaces at me, and he goes, "What's your major?" And I go, "Fire science." And he had this look of disgust on his face.
Right.
Like
you should be a writer.
He's like, you're wasting your time. Like, exactly. What? And he goes, "Listen, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you really should think about writing." I was like, "Yeah, whatever. Okay, buddy." So I go through the class. I did really well, and time goes on, and I finished my degree online, go on to finish my advanced degree online, and I realized that I kind of dug writing. And so years later, when I get promoted, we get sent through, and this is kind of the genesis of how the program started. So when I got promoted to lieutenant, my chief sent us to this 2-week officer development program. It was the I leads through the Connecticut Fire Chiefs Association. And they have a keynote guest speaker come in at the end of the 2 weeks. And our guest speaker was George Healy, deputy chief from the FDNY.
Okay.
For anybody that's not familiar with him, he was kind of like the head liaison and kind of ran operations for the Governor's Island test fires that they did with UL.
Yes.
And he came in, and again, I've always been into the job. I've tried to stay current on what's going on, but I apparently managed to be 100% oblivious to what was going on with UL and all these tests that were happening on Governor's Island. So he is going through, and he's talking about the ventilation experiments that they did. And while he's talking, I literally had that light bulb epiphany moment where my jaw nearly hit the table. And I started, as he's talking, I'm going through my brain and cycling through these different fires that I've been at where things didn't go well. And it was either because things that I did or things that I was on the receiving end of. Right. And started to put the pieces together and go, oh, shit. I go, either I did this, or this was done.
Yep.
And everybody needs to know about this. I go, how did I go this long being into the job and not knowing it? So I went back, and I did a 6-month detail as the safety officer when I first got promoted, because on our job, that's kind of like the low man on the totem pole spot. So if you're the last guy promoted, that's kind of where you get stuck until a company billet opens up. And luckily mine was only 6 months. So I go back, and I had some freedom that in between, my daily duties and the projects that I was responsible for, I kind of had some freedom to develop curriculum and do some other things. So I went back, and I started diving into the research and reaching out to people, watching podcasts and webinars, and started putting this all together. And I made a program for only our job. I had no intentions of it going anywhere else.
Right.
So I reached out to another colleague in the state and said, "Hey, can you peer review this?" And he's a instructor on the national scene, and so I'd emailed him and, "Hey, can you peer review this before I release it to the department, so I don't look like a fool? The first thing I do as an officer, I want to make sure this is vetted."
Right.
So he gets right back to me, which I didn't think was going to happen at all, and he said, "This is great. It looks good. If you keep refining this, I think you have something here. You might want to think about taking this and turning it into an article and submitting it to Fire Engineering. And if you really develop this program, I think it's got FDIC potential."
That's fantastic. Yeah.
And at that point, I just had no concept of the national scene and everything that was going on. So I called his bluff. So I went back, I wrote an article, I sent it to him, and he said, this is great. He, forwarded off to fire engineering, and the article got published, and I kept developing the program. I delivered it a few times locally.
When was that published? Do you remember the
published?
episode?
It wound up being, because the way that the magazine works is once you get an article accepted and it passes through technical review, it kind of goes into a hopper. And basically, it's not until that your article kind of jibes with whatever the theme of the magazine is for that month that it gets published. So it could be 2 months, it could be a year plus. It just depends on when it matches up with what their content is. So it happened to be
a guy.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that later. Little inside joke on that one. But anyway, go ahead.
So it happened to be when it finally was released was right before FDIC. I think it was in March of the year that I wound up teaching. So I, again, called this dude's bluff and said, hey, I'm going to put in for FDIC. I wrote up the proposal. I delivered it a few times locally. And it got picked up. And then when I got the email, like, oh, you got to be shitting me. Like, there's no way. There's no way, you know, because at that time, I'm 29 years old. And I go, you got to be freaking kidding me. I'm like, I'm going to be teaching at FDIC. And I was like, I'm not even 30 years old yet. I mean, granted, I had almost 10 years on the job at that time. But still, I mean, it was, I never thought it was going to happen. I just figured, like, you know what? Like, let me at least put the effort in and see what happens.
How humbling is it, though, that at 29 years old, I mean, even with the time you had on the job, you recognized, like, where you took back that milestone, and you were like, or not took back, but you took a step back from that milestone and recognized it. I think that, like, speaks to your character, because I know a bunch of people who'd be like, yeah, I'm 29 and I'm at FDIC, dropping microphones left and right. And, like, I just think that's...
You know what? Go ahead, Nick.
So at that point, to go on that same thread, was I kind of took that as I need to up the ante now. And a lot of guys will talk about on the fire engineering, webinars and podcasts. They say that they call it the Super Bowl of fire service and conferences.
Had you been to FDIC before that? So you didn't even know
which always ruffles a few feathers, because they're like,
but it's
that's
just
bullshit. You never even come out here.
Right.
So of course, but
so you're thrown into the lion's den.
So I took it as all right, I'm going to the big show, and I need to make sure that my program is dialed in, so that way these people that are paying top dollar to come out here are getting what they paid for, and that I'm who I say I am, and there's 100% authenticity. So that was it. I just doubled down and really just at that point that really spurred just my fascination and almost obsession with developing this program and making it what it is, because as you've made mention to, there's such a void in ventilation tactics right now when it comes to just content at the lecture level. The hands-on, it's always there, but as far as lecturing at the conferences, you don't see it.
Yeah, I went through the book today. You're the only one.
The last 2 years, I Google searched ventilation for the FDIC website, and it's the only one that pops up, because I'm glad that engine company operations, it's getting its due attention, but the pendulum has swung completely in the other direction, that there is zero attention, and ventilation and fire attack and engine company operations goes hand in hand.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's
what I love about your class, though, is that, like, you started it out with this whole 60-second blurb and how you don't like the word tactical. And I think, like, for me, having dealt in another industry and where tactical is all the rage, like, it was great to sit there and just listen. And can you just hit on that? Because I really, like, for me, that's where I put my stuff down. And I was like, I'm going to pay attention to this guy, because he's on to something here.
So I listened because he had a cool mustache at the time. That's really why I dialed into it. But go ahead, Nick.
So
mustache, he looks like he could vent a roof. Like that's right. That's exactly where Jeremy was.
So one of the things that kind of brought me to that road was so much of how my class is set up now and my teaching style comes from things that I've adapted from other instructors. So anybody who sat through one of Aaron Field's program knows that, you know, he always says words matter.
Words matter.
So we in the fire service and in life in general, we tend to use words very casually and sometimes without even realizing what the true meaning is and why certain words are associated with certain topics. So in public safety, the military, the word tactical gets thrown around all over the place. And it's, you know, you look at the brand 511 and everything is tactical. I mean, the briefcase that's sitting underneath me is a tactical briefcase.
Tactical khakis, tactical button-up shirt.
Everything is tactical because it sounds sexy and it sounds whatever you want to call it.
Dip and Velcro.
Right. So it's, strap some Molly on it, paint it black, and it's
You're absolutely right.
Bam, you can double the price, and we're gonna sell them by the truckload. So when I started researching about ventilation, I saw the word tactical associated with it. So I'm like, all right, let's look up what tactical actually means. And if you look it up, the three main definitions that pop up are temporary advantage, which if you look at ventilation, we always stress that it's coordinated. So yes, there's an inherent benefit that comes with ventilation, but it's temporary. If you do nothing else but ventilate, that whatever benefit that you gain is going to be very fleeting.
That's right.
So it's a temporary advantage. Then the next one is it supports an objective. That's the whole point of ventilation. We're either supporting fire attack or we're supporting search or victim survivability.
It's not the main stage.
No. It's a support function.
That's right.
All right. And then the last one was it's to achieve a goal, which the goal for us is the mission. And the mission is preserving life and property. And that's what it's all about. So if you look at those three primary definitions of the word, it resonates very clearly why it should be associated with ventilation. And if you look at even in like FDNY's operational doctrine, like their ventilation bulletin, they refer to it as tactical ventilation for that very reason. And they've actually gone as far as changing the semantics of they don't use vent for life and vent for fire anymore. It's vent for extinguishment and vent for search because they want to reaffirm that task-oriented supportive nature of vent. So you're not venting for the fire, you're venting to support extinguishment or you're venting to support the search. So they really want to put that emphasis on that ventilation is a support function. It's not its own independent thing. So that's where that kind of came from and allowed me to dial that in and explain the basis of that. So it's not just some word that's thrown in to sell seats and.
No, I get it. And listen, like I'm sitting here and I've been holding off on bringing this up, and I just wanted to just step back one or two steps, right? You initially were talking about being in college and you went off to the fire, all you wanted to do was get into the fire academy and so on. And what I love is that you found your passion. You knew where you wanted to go. You got to the firehouse. You got hired at a young age. And then you finish your career or you finish your education. And then you take your education another step further. And then you sit there and you have that epiphany moment where, it dawns on you that, Chief Healy, I think you said it was, right? Where it went off and you said, man, there's more to this, right? Everything that's happening on the job is starting to make sense about what didn't go right that job or why it worked so well on this fire, right? So you start to have all these moments. And I'm sitting here and I underline, the journal. I'm going to get to the journal in a minute, but words matter, right? And then what I consistently think of every time I talk to you, and tonight just absolutely reinforces it, is how methodical you are. No, I mean that in a million ways. Like when you first talking about college and you were like, it's wasn't my thing. I wanted to get in the firehouse. I'm thinking of a kid that like wanted to go off to college and just party, have fun, and like, enjoy life. And like, I'm very much that way too, right? But then I find an avenue that I love. These guys are just shaking their heads over that. Then I find that avenue that just is a true passion and love of mine, and that I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to do the reading and the writing, and so I'm sitting here listening to you, and I resonate with that. I get it because you found your calling, you found your niche, and now what you're bringing to the table is your authenticity and your methodical behavior of learning, understanding, digesting, breaking it down, and then educating us. I love that, man. Like I'm sitting here listening to all this, and I just think it's a fantastic buildup. It really is.
It is. Yeah.
And the fact that you on the national stage now and you have the ability, I mean, it is the, I don't know what, the Super Bowl of teaching, if you will, right? You make it there. I mean, it's the big
You're
time.
in with the gods.
Yeah. It's really a great institution because it allows for, the one thing fire engineering does very well with FDIC is it's typically the best of the best, if you will, right? They're vetted, right? So the people that are instructing there, their content is solid, their content is tried and true. The methodology behind all of it makes sense, and they're established. And I kudos to you, man. I mean, that's fantastic. And it's something you love, and that's the best part about it, man. Yeah. That's the best part about it. So awesome. So where are we going? So you're gonna be in FDIC, right? Yep. So the class is called, let me get it right, it's Venting Tactically the Ins and Outs of Opening Up.
Correct.
And so that's the class that we saw last year up in Maine at the New England Fools. And then I was really enamored by it, and I remember at the end of it, I came up to you and I remember introducing myself to you, and I just said, hey man, I never sat through a ventilation class before. Mm-hmm. Never. Like when you go, I mean, on the other end of my journal here, I have like breaking glass, windows underlined, like, what do you do with the new kid on the truck? Go break glass, right? Like go open up, and it's like I just think that it's
can't use golf balls anymore. I mean, windows are too good.
That's a whole nother story. But ultimately, like, this is now something where I think, getting your message out there, it slows everybody down just a second, where maybe ventilation is that support function of the greater good, if you will, or the greater picture. It still needs to be discussed because it is a coordinated event that really needs to be trained on, talked about. And it's probably not for your young kid on the fire ground, which typically we assign to going around as the outside vent, OV, go break some glass and so on. And, and then find your way to the rear, ladder to the rear, get up to the roof, help the driver, help whoever open up. Like these are all things that like aren't really discussed, I think, as far as they should be.
No. And I'm glad you touched on that, is because the people that ride in the ladder company or perform your truck functions, if you will, whether you have a ladder company or not. I just taught out in Missouri, and they don't have ladder companies out there. I mean, with the exception of KC and St. Louis and the immediate metro area that may have a Quint, it's all very engine company driven. Once you get outside of the metro city areas, it gets very rural very fast. Yeah. So that was one of the comments in the evals was, we don't have truck companies. Like, stop saying truck company. Yeah. So of course. So whoever's performing those support functions, especially if it's the roof or the outside vent position, you have to remember that the individuals that are doing that are typically working autonomously. They're either by themselves or it's with another private. They're independent from an officer, especially on the paid jobs. So you need to be dialed in, because whoever the senior firefighter is in that position, or if you're working alone, you need to be able to make decisions that are going to impact the entire fire ground, because we all know that a ventilation in the wrong place at the wrong time can negatively impact the entire fire ground itself.
Absolutely.
So you need to have somebody that understands building construction, that understands fire behavior, that is able to have the wherewithal and the situational awareness to be able to monitor the radio traffic, to understand where guys are operating, what their progress is, what they're experiencing for conditions, to know when, where, and how to ventilate to have the effect that they've set out to have to support those other operations. So I agree. You need to be squared away that, you should have at least a couple of years on the engine to get your sea legs and figure things out. And there's something to be said too of being on the receiving end of that ventilation before you actually go and do it. Mm-hmm. Because after I got promoted, I went back to the engine company. And to be honest with you, that has allowed me so I went from the ladder company as a private, where I was either on the inside, doing the searches, or, being in the outside doing the ventilation, to the one going back on the inside of the engine and being on the receiving end of the ventilation. So to be honest with you, who better to give you insight onto how best to coordinate ventilation than the one that's actually receiving it?
That's right.
Okay. Because that's great. You can tell me all you want how to break glass and cut roofs, and you may be an expert in that technique, but until you've been on the receiving end of that ventilation and you know what it feels like when it comes too late, or it comes too early, or when it's that Goldilocks and it's just right, then you really have that full understanding of what it actually means so it's given me a more well-rounded appreciation for the tactic and be able to understand it that much more and really take the class to the next level. Because essentially now as the engine company officer, I'm at that tip of the spear now, and I'm usually the one that's either calling or confirming that ventilation from that outside vent or roof firefighter.
Right.
So that's, when it comes to coordination, which is really the linchpin for ventilation, that's where it comes down. That's what it comes down to.
It's that whole coordination thing that people don't quite get. They'll go up and cut the roof, but is it the right time yet? Did you talk to them?
Well, I just wrote down, right? So this journal thing for me is kind of new.
Mm-hmm.
And like I was alluding to it earlier, and we'll talk about it. But what I just wrote down was correct ventilation is impactful, right? There's so many times ventilation's performed, but it does not impact the fire ground, right? It's not impacting our push or the ability to get deeper or farther or to get to the seat, right? And so, there's a lot of times buildings are getting opened up, but they're not being opened up. Timing, okay. Like, I can get over glass being taken a little too early or a little too late, or a roof being pulled a little too early, a little too late, but the functions has to get done. But there's a lot of times that function's being done, but it's not impactful because it's way too early or it's way too late, and it's not helping the job at hand, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of communications that people don't quite get with that.
Huge communication aspect. And a lot of it is done passively too, or I kind of alluded to earlier, where it's being able to listen to that radio traffic and understand how the incident is progressing. Have they located the seat of the fire? Are they in position? Are they flowing water? Are they making headway?
Yep.
Those are all the things that you need to understand. And going back to teaching up in Maine, and I had the pleasure of teaching after Steve Robertson. And Steve is a trip. I mean, I loved being a student and sitting through his class.
Super smart and knowledgeable.
Such a great dude.
And to the point.
But I mean, really quality instructor.
Mm-hmm.
Is that perfect balance of that street cred and that experience, but he's an effective instructor too. Right. He's able to translate his street experience in a way that resonates with you and sticks with you, because that's what the thing that people have to realize too, is you may have all the street cred in the world, but it doesn't make you a good instructor. I mean, you could work in West Baltimore and see more fire than anybody else in the country, but if you don't have those communication skills to be able to pass along all that knowledge and experience you have, you're essentially no good to anybody.
Yeah.
And again, that's not knocking those guys by any means, but I'm kind of making the point of, there's another half to it.
A good player and a good coach.
Exactly. I mean, you look at how many guys that you could be a Hall of Famer and you could be a lousy coach.
Right. Absolutely.
It doesn't. Again, you may know the game and you may know the ins and outs, but unless you can communicate that effectively, that's what makes a good instructor. Sure. And Steve's got a really good balance of that. But getting back to the point was, when I was teaching, I loved it because, and again, this is that humility to remember that you're always a student. So Steve would just interject at random intervals when something would
he was walking the room.
He was pacing. He was like, because he's thinking from the engine company perspective, right. And he's thinking of, okay, how does this relate to what I just taught and what I'm teaching, and you could see the wheels were turning in the whole time. And now for me, this is kind of a moment of truth for me, because now I kind of regard Steve as one of those seasoned. He's one of those top tier instructors. Yep. He's from a very busy urban department. He's in a very ghetto district, and he's a world-class instructor. So he's in the room, and now he is a front row observing me. So this is the true test.
A game.
So he starts interjecting, and now at first I'm like, oh man, is he going to blow this all apart? I mean, where's he going with this? And he starts going, and now he's dovetailing his perspective from the engine company and the things that he just spoke about in his lecture into what I'm talking about. And I learned just as much as any student, if not more, from that were sitting in that lecture.
People got a 2-for-1.
It was amazing. I mean, even Aaron Heller afterwards was like, "Man, I got to get you two together at some point." He goes, "That would make for a good conference." And I had a blast. And afterwards, I got you talk about those things in your career and in your life where they, sometimes it's the smallest gestures that mean the world to you. And at the bar afterwards, because we had a great time at night after the conference, and
Yes, we did.
yeah.
Was I there for that?
You know our friend from Massachusetts.
He doesn't remember.
So
Oh, we had a blast, man.
Jeremy and I remember
we
everything.
had a blast.
We had a good time.
And after, at like
Very
right as the
Hall.
night was winding down and everyone's starting to go their separate ways, Steve kind of, just kind of put his arm on my shoulder and just kind of gave me one of those attaboys. And it was like, to me, that meant more to me than, that was tops. Like for me, that as an instructor, that was one of those moments that I always remember. So that,
and for me to be a part of that, right? I mean, just being in the crowd and listening and watching and, and so on. I mean, this is why these smaller conferences are so good, right? You got a room of 30 people,
Right, yeah.
30, 40 people tops that were exposed to, top tier lectures from, the top tier instructors in the country that teach all over the country. And then to be able to listen to those stories come together, those classes come together. You don't get that at the big conference. You don't get that in all those, 200 class, 200 person lectures. I mean, this is the small stuff. And that's why we love these local conferences, because when you can get some of the talent in there, I mean, it's just what an experience to be able to sit there and absorb it and take it all in. It's incredible.
and that's the beauty of the Fools organization too.
Yeah,
is
agreed.
Everybody in the audience is there for the right reasons.
Yep.
There's nobody in the Fools that's just there for the certificate.
Yep.
It's not even close.
Yeah, nobody drove up to Maine
No.
to go drink.
No.
I mean, they might have drank, but it wasn't the whole purpose of, hey, we're gonna go to this place and drink the, it was, everyone was dialed into learning.
Yeah, everyone's intentions are 100% pure. They're there for the right reasons. Yeah. It's all, it's also for the fraternity and the brotherhood and all those things that we talk about in stress, but it's also for the education piece too, because that's really what the kind of the Fools was founded on was
Yep.
bringing education to areas that wouldn't otherwise be able to have that. And that's the beauty part of that organization, and to see that it's, if anything, growing by the day is a beautiful thing.
Oh, I agree. I mean, it's all adding to the betterment of the fire service and what we do. And when you get guys that are dialed in and you surround yourself with those people, and we've learned over the last 2 years with National Fire Radio is you surround yourself with people you want to be with. Surround yourself with like-minded people, and great things are going to happen every single time. So I agree with that 100%. So what's next for Nick Papa, man? I mean, career's going well.
Yeah.
You got FDIC coming up in April. You got some other projects in the works from what we were
You
talking about
writing
earlier,
a book yet?
which is exciting.
Well, so I'll give a little teaser there. I'm putting the finishing touches on a manuscript for a book.
fantastic.
Nice.
It's literally the class in written form. And, I wasn't in the service myself, but a lot of my reading is military based, because
Right.
there's so much to learn, through leadership, and I just want to know about the sacrifices that our service men and women have made
amazing.
throughout the years to allow our country to be what it is. And in my reading and some of the classes I've taken through Leadership Under Fire, Jason Bresler's organization,
Right.
it was he just got promoted off of Rescue 2, runs a phenomenal organization called Leadership Under Fire. And one of the main books that's on their reading list is the Marine Corps Doctrinal publication. It's the manual on tactics, and then their warfighting manual. And it's a short, easy read. And it doesn't matter if you're in the military or not, if fire service, law enforcement, there's so many parallels in there, especially when it comes to the command and control of the fire ground. There's so many lessons that can be learned out of that. So when I was reading, after I read through those two pieces, I loved how it was set up. It was a very short read. It wasn't this big document, this textbook, or this giant SOP that nobody ever actually reads.
Right.
It was a functional working document, and it even says in there, from the first version of the warfighting manual that was written, it even says in there, this is not designed to be a reference manual. It is designed to be read from cover to cover. the Commandant of the Marine Corps that wrote that document in its first publication wanted his Marines to read that from cover to cover and be familiar with their doctrine, their operational doctrine. So that's when, and we spoke about this, off camera, was this is what the fire service needs, because when you look at the textbooks that are out there for the fire service, and they're textbooks, they serve a purpose. They're either designed to be used as certification classes, college courses, or promotional exams. They serve a very distinct purpose. But when I was speaking to another author, another guy that's on the circuit, he had said that he goes, I'll be the first one to admit that nobody's going out and hopping on Amazon and buying my 600-page, book to just as a leisurely read to help them in the fire service. I mean, yeah, you might get that occasional outlier, but it's nobody's picking up those giant textbooks to just sit and read as a personal betterment. So what I wanted to do was I mirrored my book manuscript to follow along suit with those Marine Corps doctrines, so that they were short, easy reads that you could take it in sections and read a couple pages here and there, whether it was, in the Oval Office or, whether, you were in the day room or the kitchen table of the firehouse.
Where your attention is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In that way I wanted it to be 100% functional, because we can all recall, whether it's studying for a promotional exam, the books that we've had to read for the courses that we've had to take, so much of these books are just, they're repeating themselves over and over again.
Filler.
They get a little boring.
They need the filler,
to
because they
read
got to
stuff
hit that word count,
right.
or the amount of chapters or the page numbers. So it's basically, they're just rephrasing what they've already said, just in a different way. Or maybe it's more war stories that, the stories are important, and that's what's so beautiful about our culture and why it's so important. And one of the things that I know you guys try to preserve with your platform is the stories,
right?
But they have to be functional. The stories that you tell have to prove a point. Okay, so and I make sure that the stories that I have in the manuscript and the same stories that I provide in the lecture are short and to the point, and you can very easily make that connection of the story and what happened to the concepts that I just spoke about.
Yeah, that's cool.
Think about when you said about taking the door off and how you remembered that somebody once said, like, hey, remove the door and use it if you have to. It might not be the door that fits the frame, but the closet door will work to buy you some time. And that's what you did. And I remember that. I'm sitting there going, like, yeah, you know what? I've passed a lot of closet doors, and but I've never passed a door that actually fits the frame, and that's like, all right, cool. It's going in the memory bank.
Yeah, what you're talking about, Rob, was one of the lessons that were learned the hard way. Was, we had a fire in a 1.5 story bungalow, wood frame. We were the third due engine company. First due got there. It was the small rear porch. Made a quick knock on it as we're walking up. I mean, you see the white smoke coming up over the roof line, and you're thinking to yourself, it's all done. We missed everything. So we roll up at the same time as the ladder. We go in, and now we're charged with search of the 2 floors and checking for extension. First floor is completely clean. We go up to 2, and there's 2 bedrooms and a bathroom up there. So we go up to the rear bedroom, which is right above where the porch was, and there's just a light haze hanging about just over head height. I mean, it's just lazy. It's hanging there. Light smoke, and you're like, it's just residual. Probably went through the stud channels, and now it's collecting up in the top floor.
Smoke, yep.
No big deal. So I'm scanning with the thermal imaging camera, and I pick up a little heat signature to the left of the window, which is, again, directly above where the porch was. And I get like 125, 130. I'm like, it's probably just heat that traveled up the stud channel. There's no paint blistering. There's nothing else that's jumping out at me. Luckily, one of my buddies, or my classmates, was in the iron seat and got right up on the window, and he happened to catch a wisp of smoke coming out of the corner of the window frame, and it was pissing out of the corner under pressure. So he brings it to the attention of his officer, and now again we're in search and investigation mode, so neither one of us have a line.
No line in place. Yeah.
So he opens up a very disciplined, softball-sized inspection hole. Nothing crazy. Flame instantly appears in the inspection hole. So I get on the radio, engine 1 to command, chief, we got fire in the walls. We need to line up the 2. Yeah, received, on the way. So now one of the other engines starts bringing the line up, and now all of a sudden that little flame that just appeared in the hole now starts blow torching out under pressure.
Yeah.
With authority.
Yep.
So now and now it's running up running up the wall, and now it's running across the ceiling. So as the smoke is starting to bank down, and it's literally like we're inside one of those UL burn chambers where you get where they show the progression of flashover.
Starts in a corner, rolls up, comes across.
So let's say I get back on the radio and I call for that line with a little bit more vigor this time. And now that thermal balance is starting to drop down to my shoulders, and I go, everybody out of the room. So luckily I had the senior man on the ladder was working overtime with me that day. And we like guys joke and call this guy Santa Claus because he's been on more roofs than Santa Claus. And he hates it because he's such a humble dude.
Right.
And this guy, Tony Parada, who's just the most humble guy. He's the senior man on the ladder company out of my house. Tremendous amount of experience and just the most humble, easygoing, good dude that he is that epitome of the senior man that you want. Mm-hmm. So he was so heads up and was running around shutting the windows that were open because it was in the summer. It was June. So it was June or August. So he slammed the windows shut to try and prevent any more air from getting in. So he's running around, and now there's no line yet. So I tell everyone, all right, time to get out of the room. So my driver's anchored at the door, and I tell him, all right, bro, I'm the last one out. Close the door behind us. And I hear, bro, there's no door. You gotta be shitting me. And now the smoke is like halfway to the floor at this point. So and going back to the stories, and when you look at how our brains work, if the stories are told well enough with enough imagery and enough detail, our brain may actually store that as its own memory. So I remembered a story from one of our senior lieutenants about how he jacked a door off of a neighboring room to confine the fire and buy them some time while the line was being stretched because they had searched ahead. He was the rescue officer until they closed the rescue company. So thank God I was able to retrieve that slide from the Rolodex, at the right moment. And as I'm scanning the room, I caught the closet door, and I said, bro, I'm like, get over here. I'm like, we need to get the door off its hinges. We popped the door off with the Halligan bar, and now, of course, it's a closet door. Okay, so closet doors are typically more narrow, and they can be louvered. So now it's not ideal, but it's what we have. So now I'm sitting there. The guys are stacked up behind me. It's a tiny little bungalow, so it's a little hallway landing. So I'm literally like just hunkered down, holding the door and watching the thermal balance just continue to drop down. And again, the senior man being so heads up, he flew down the stairs, intercepted the line from the other engine company, passed it up the stairs because he knew the last thing we needed was more bodies up there. So he passes the line up. It goes into the hands of actually the Irons firefighter on the ladder because he was right next to me. He hops on the nozzle. I get behind him. We boogie in, and it was like that. But that line appeared in just the nick of time because that, again, like being in one of those UL videos, we were starting to watch the thermal balance start to bob.
Yeah, right.
It was starting to do that wave, and I'm like, oh man, we're going to lose this whole second floor just because of a stupid inspection hole.
Well, what I liked about it was that, so recently I ran a mutual aid fire up to Hyde Park, and when I got up to the second floor, I'm noticing it was all hollow core doors that were kind of half open. So they're all I'm feeling them, and I'm taking them off their hinges, but they're all halfway burned out. And when I moved to the left of the fire room because the guys were in there with the line, and the first thing I noticed is all right, there's a mattress over here. I can grab that and block it off if I have to. And I'm like, where the hell did that come from? Where did if something goes wrong, and I'm thinking to myself, and it just pop, closet door. So it's just great to kind of bring that round because your class and that experience that it got what you said about having it pop into the Rolodex. It was popping around. And I'm like, all right. And I literally pulled the mattress off, and someone was like, oh wow, you were doing a real aggressive search in that room. And I'm like, yes, but really in reality, I was searching a room, but I was also pulling that mattress and kind of staging it so that if something, God forbid something went down, I had that to put up, and nothing happened, but still, it's
because again, as time goes on and fire duty dwindles for most of us, we need to rely on the storytelling. And when I can't impress it upon guys enough that on our job, when there's a fire, you better be picking the brains of those guys that were there to figure out what they had for conditions, what they did, what worked, what didn't work, if there was anything unusual that happened, because you're getting that secondhand experience.
Right.
You're living vicariously
free
through
knowledge.
them.
That's right. We tell a story in my house all the time. It's very similar to yours. Chimney fire was a split level. So we went in. I took the floor above. The line went down. So they went down to the first level, down like 5 steps to the left to the chimney. It was involved in the walls, had to open up. I'm on the second floor. Behind the hutch in the dining area, you could see a flicker. So I knew there was fire in the wall running to the second floor and probably upward. So we go around. So I got this kid with me. He's like 6'7", like 340, massive kid. And I'm not fat, like big, like wrestler big. You shake his hand, it's like shaking a bunch of bananas, right? He's a monster, right? So I go, help me move the hutch. So we pull the hutch aside, right? And I remember the fire was running the tape on the wall. And so he starts to open it up. He takes 2 swings, and I had to grab him, and I'm like, stop. I'm like, we don't have a line. They're downstairs. There's not a second line anywhere near coming up here. And we sat there and we watched this fire progress until we get a second line, or I think we got a can at the time. Can came in and knocked it down at least for us till we can get it. But the storytelling after the fact was, listen, inexperience. Don't open up until we have a line in place. You start to open up, things go bad. We don't have a line in place. We're in trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you find because one of the things that we like, and I'm very blessed with where I work in this one aspect is that like our chief has a very good program with the helmet cameras, and he lets us run them. And his rules are very simple. I better not see it on the internet without my express permission. So like in-house, we're able to say like, hey, this is the fire we ran last week. Do you find that like that helmet camera footage is helpful in the teaching aspect to kind of, I know San Bernardino does a lot with it. Like
San Bernardino's excellent.
Yeah,
Stockton's another great one.
Yep.
They've got tremendous footage. I mean, they're amazing.
and the
teaching
coordination
tools.
is
And they
there.
do a lot
like,
of work.
And they do a lot of work.
do a lot
and
of
they do
work.
it well too.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
The West Coast has a thing for especially
do.
opening up topside. I mean, they
I met a bunch
do
of
it and
guys
they do
in
it regularly.
Vallejo. I was out there last year, and Vallejo is a tough city, and they do a lot of work with minimum staffing. And those guys, it's a East Coast mentality of like 2 bottles before you even think of getting a bottle of water. You know what I mean? That type of thing. Badass, man. Badass.
Yeah.
But it's good. I mean, I think that's important. I mean, what you were talking about, Nick, the storytelling's part of training, right? Experiences, because these guys aren't, all of us, nobody's running to fires every day anymore. And so we have to kind of live vicariously through some of the stories of the more senior guys that have a story to tell.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, as I've kind of expanded my reading, and, one of the other books that I would tremendously recommend to anybody listening is Colonel Dave Grossman's On Combat.
Yes.
And it will give you such a better insight as to how the body and the brain functions under stress.
100%.
Why that we this is one of Chris Brennan's terms that Rick George talks about all the time, but the training scars.
Yeah.
Why we have certain training scars, and why people will do things that seem so counterintuitive on the fire ground or in whatever particular profession that you're in under stress. Because if you go back to the way that we were trained, it's very clear why that behavior took place.
Well, it programs you.
It absolutely does. Yeah. So one of the examples that he gives in the book was, he talked about, I believe it was the FBI in their firearms training. This was back decades ago. So when they would discharge their weapon, they had very strict range policies to keep it clean, and they'd have to immediately get down and clean up their brass.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep.
So
you caught me on this one.
So after they discharged their weapon, they hit their target, they got down and immediately started cleaning up their brass, or else they'd get screamed at by the instructors. So lo and behold, as these guys are hitting the street, some of them are getting involved in active gunfights, and after their weapon gets spent, they're bending down and picking up their brass in an active gunfight. And some of these guys got hit. So after they kind of put the pieces together, they're like, whoa, we got to go back to the drawing board, and we need to make sure that we restructure our training methodologies and making sure that we're very cognizant of these habits that we're ingraining in them, whether they're purposeful or not. So that was one of the stories that he gives. And that's, if you take that and translate it to the fire ground, this is what I know Brothers in Battle and Cody Trestrell's group is big on this, But if you look at our search training, what happens after you find the victim after you do a search? You dump it out on you dump it out on the
High
cement.
five, everybody.
And you either go back in to finish your search, or the evolution's over,
Yep.
and you go and take a blow. And that mannequin's just sitting there.
Right.
So what happens when you actually
You never
find...
do the pass off.
Right. So there's no transfer of care to the EMS or to another crew.
Right.
So yeah, if you're going to go back in to finish your search, you better be handing them off to another provider. And if there's no provider, well, guess you're it.
Yeah, right.
Because you can't leave that victim, especially if they're unconscious, to go in and potentially find another victim that may not be there. And now you've left this victim who is in need of immediate care with no care.
Right.
So again, going back to that bird in the hand versus, is worth two in the bush. It's that same mentality. So we have to be very mindful in the habits that we're breeding on the drill ground, and make sure that we're, in one of the stories that Aaron tells it, because he's got a very big, Aaron Fields, he talks about his wrestling and Sambo background. And when he had trained with the Mongolian national team, he had gotten up off the mat a certain way when he first got there. And this old crusty coach was like, no, don't get up that way. And he was like, what do you mean? He goes, we don't move that way on the mat. So everything was, even from getting up off the mat, even if it wasn't in a match, had to be functional. Because if you didn't do the technical stand up or move the way that you would move on the mat, he didn't want you doing it at all. Because if you were doing it just subconsciously anytime, you would potentially make that same mistake on the mat. It's the same thing, because when you're under duress and the stress wreaks havoc on the body, you kind of resort back to that primitive mindset,
right? You know,
and it's what's ingrained and tattooed in your brain.
I did a drill as a company officer. This is almost a year ago, I think, where I did like a rapid intervention thing where they went downstairs, they got a guy, brought him upstairs, and everyone's like, "All right, awesome, we did it." I was like, "All right, now the drill started," and I forget where I got the idea from, and I just pointed to the one guy that was there, and I was like, "You're now dead." He's like, what? I was like, lay down. And he was still in his gear. And I'm like, he just went into sudden cardiac arrest. Like, figure it out and do it. And the guy is like, and thankfully I had one of the EMS officers there. They staged a CPR mannequin on the cot in the second ambulance. So I had him actually load him on the first ambulance stretcher. But then they went and transitioned into the ambulance next to it and started doing CPR. And like, I was screaming things like, hey, somebody call Mike's wife and let her know to come to the hospital, like just to kind of get him going. But like, one of the guys almost drove the ambulance out with the doors open on the side because he was so tuned into like, I think we captured that realism. But like,
it's also radio transmissions. You know, if you have a guy that's panicking on the radio, all of a sudden everybody starts panicking. If you're calm, even if the shit is hitting the fan, everybody else stays calm and they get their job done.
You got to get them there first. You got to
reality is important, right? And we, I think we do a good job. There's a lot of great training groups. You've mentioned a couple tonight that do a fantastic job in bringing reality to the fireground, or to the firehouse for training. But a lot of it comes down to the company training.
Absolutely,
right? Because that's 99% of it, and complacency is huge. I know it happens in my firehouse, and I'm as guilty as anyone in our firehouse for complacency. It happens, right? It just absolutely happens. Went to a fire the other night, so everybody's fired up again, and everything went, we had one or two hiccups with, a kid hooking up and so on. But other than that, like, everything went well. But afterwards, we took that opportunity where it was a mutual aid run for us. So the threads were different on the hydrant, but we carry the different threads and they're colored differently, but they didn't take all the correct ones to the hydrant because they didn't know what they needed. So there was a delay in getting a supply line set up. No problem. I mean, tank water took care of, the initial supply until we got the line stretched. But the issue was, after the fact, when we were picking up, we actually all took a knee at the hydrant and went over it. Right? It was a great
that's where
opportunity.
that critique comes in, which
you have to do,
and it wasn't punitive.
No, not at all. Because I was 24 years in the firehouse, and I said, guys, let's take a knee. I want to refresh my own memory on doing. How often do we hook up at an adjoining town's hydrant? Not every day. Yeah. So let's take an extra second and talk about it, right? Like, let's talk about the connection, how we make the connection. Are we using hydrant assist? Are we not? Like, all these different things. So, it was a good lesson. But where I'm going with this is reality. It comes down to the company level. It comes down to the ability to have realistic training and to seek it. I always constantly think of like the door prop, and we have kids that are fantastic at popping a metal door. I mean, these kids, they line up on this thing and they can pop those 2 wood chocks and the what you call it, the shims, no problem, right? They can pop that in 30 seconds. Throw a real door at them, right? Throw a real door at them. It's different, right? Or throw
put it up against the wall and take the full freedom of maneuver.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you don't have the ability to go 180 on the door, right? So put yourself in a cramped, narrow position and then take that door, right? So it's just finding those extra things. And we always talk in training about like, oh, just back to the basics. We need to be good at the basics. Basics are great, but there's also a level of expectancy in the firehouse that you should really be honed in on the basics, right? I mean, it's good to get back to it every once in a while, but you should also know the basics, right? You're a firefighter, you're on the line. Back to the basics is great, but back to the basics should be every 3 months. We talk about the basics to be sure that, everybody is just compliant with rules, regulations, SOGs.
It's like reseasoning a cast iron pan.
Yeah, right? I mean, do we have to...
Wow, we're getting into the cooking class
again. We got to quote
again.
that one.
Get awfully deep there.
Like
There's some
Can you claim that?
some
Or
layers
did you
there,
steal that
yeah.
somewhere?
I'm gonna claim it.
take
Write that baby down.
But anyway, Nick, I mean, I agree with you, bro.
I think Rob's got to do the George Costanza. I'm out. He's got his one line and he's done.
That's it. Gone. But that's fantastic, man. I mean, tonight's been fantastic. We're going on, and I love it. We could talk for hours, and I'm just really happy for you, man. It seems like things are going in the right direction for you, and I think it's all because of all your hard work and everything that you've put in on the back end to better your position and to better all of us. I mean, we brought you in. We had you were
just and that you don't accept just enough. Like good enough isn't good enough for you. Like. That's what I've sat in the class and we've met before. You did the On Tap event with us.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. Go ahead.
And define everything else. But like the fact that like tonight you told me the story behind like, this kind of like, I don't want to call it a crapshoot, but like you were like, I'm going to call the bluff and I'm going to get, and I'm going to write an article and now I'm going to teach. And when you had that moment and it's like, hey, like you didn't just sit back on your laurels and go, yeah, I've arrived. Like you were like, okay, there's a responsibility here to make sure I'm delivering the best product I can feasibly deliver. And you went and took those extra steps to get there. And it shows in the program that we've had you do and what we sat through. So I just think that's awesome, you know, because like there's a lot of people out there who say, no, you got it. It's okay. Like we saw it in Hutto when we were down in Texas. There are kids who are out there asking the instructors, and the instructors are taking sandwiches and going outside during the lunch break to get extra reps in with these students.
It's fantastic.
Like it's, same line of mentality.
But I think all that mentality just goes to why there's certain guys make it to a certain level in their career. And I think you're very much at that position. And I think you have a long career ahead of you to even better and hone and do bigger and better. I really do, Nick. I think it was super great to have you here tonight and just to have the conversation with you. We've known each other for over a year now. And, you were our first inaugural speaker at our On Tap, which ended up being on a night of
monsoon,
right?
Yeah. It's absurd.
There was rain that came from the sky. There was rain that came straight up. There was even sideways rain.
It was I don't know what the hell that was, but there. I mean, it was locusts. I mean, it was
like I said. You should have pulled the Costanza around.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Poor Rob. Rob's like, screw you.
I can't screw up any more than last week.
So anyways.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But I will say, that was our first, and I'm looking at I actually printed off the flyer today, May 29th, 2019. We'll go down to the day of infamy for flooding in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey. But we did, anyway, threw a party that night for our first On Tap, and you were our first speaker. And since then, we've done many others, but that one will always be an important one for us because it was our first one we ever did. And you put on a fantastic performance. And when I say performance, I don't mean that in a sticky type of way, because what you do is, even tonight sitting here, and I mentioned it before when you were talking about your proby years and cadet years, if you will, and you had a smile from ear to ear. And when you teach, you get a passion behind you. And that's something that really stuck with me. We saw that in Maine, and then that's why I really wanted to get you in as a lecturer for us on the On Tap series, was because you connect with the end user. You connect with me. You know, you connect with the guys in the crowd because you're passionate about it. And I think that's important. Don't lose that passion because it's infectious. It really is. And I think it's important. And I'm sure if you're doing it on the lecture series and out teaching and so on, it's happening in your firehouse every day. And your guys are fortunate to have you as a boss. So it's good stuff, man. But I wish you the utmost success with everything coming forward. I mean, we've been going for like an hour and a half already. It goes quick, man.
It does.
It does. But we'll definitely have you back anytime. You have an open invite here. And thank you. You know, thanks for trusting us with your story. You were fantastic tonight. Rob, Tucker, you got anything?
We'll see you out in FDIC.
Yeah.
Sure.
Looking forward to that. That'll be good. Oh, let's talk about this real quick. The tin.
Shoot.
We didn't talk about
yeah.
All right. So we do customary for all of our guests on the show and guys that speak for us at the On Tap event. Anybody that we do a project with, right? Like tonight, right? You know, if this was your first time with us, you would get a tin in the mail. Couple weeks later, we send you a Taylor's tin, which is Taylor's a good friend of ours and supports the show as a sponsor. And so, you know, we send out his tin and, you know, your name on it, blah, blah, blah. So last year, we were sitting at the Allison in, no, you know what? It was the Making a Stretch conference, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
So it wasn't even a Harrisburg show. It was the Kelly's conference, the Making a Stretch conference, right? And I went out for the day. I went to Harrisburg for the day just to see you guys have a beer at the Allison. If you don't know what the Allison Hook and Ladder is, you're losing. So truly,
It's amazing.
it is, right? So
You
in
never have any
Harrisburg,
beer.
Pennsylvania, Jason Lloyd, Sharpie, and the rest of the group out there, man, these guys have something that I think epitomizes what the fire service is truly what it's all about.
100%.
And it's infectious when you go there. And if you're not aware of what the Allison Hook and Ladder is, and you watch our content, please YouTube it, Google it, check it out. It is the most incredible place. It's basically a clubhouse for the best of the best where the stories are embellished and the beers go down really well. But it is a place you want to be.
Yeah, I mean the woodwork, the
whole
place.
the stained glass
Is
transom
that your
windows.
have you been there before? Or
That was my first time there too.
Man.
That was a virgin moment for me.
And they do those haircuts there.
They do a haircut there. Yeah. There's just a lot of tradition.
I shaved Dan McCauley's mustache.
That's fantastic. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So anyway,
all six hairs of them.
All 6 hairs. That's great. So I get there kind of, these guys had the conference all day. I went out for the day. I couldn't do the conference. So I went out for the day, ended up at the Allison to just have a couple beers, share some stories and some camaraderie. And then I was going to boogie home. From Harrisburg to my house is just under 3 hours. So it was a long day, but we're out in Harrisburg. I bring one of my guys with me, one of the guys that I'm friends with, and he's on the job in Paterson, New Jersey. And so, you know, tough city, good fireman. I said, you'll love this. Come with me, man. And so we go out. We get there. We don't get there until late. And I end up sitting down at the bar next to Nick on the second floor. They have this beautiful bar, and we sit down and we're doing a beer or two. And we're talking, and now I don't remember the exact. You obviously have a little more remembrance of how the conversation went, but go ahead, man.
Yeah, so
we're tough.
Yeah, so we're sitting there, you know, we're shooting the shit, and the whole tins came up, and I'm like, yeah, like what about? I threw a little shot out there about not having one. And he goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "Well, I never got one, bro." And he's like, and he turns white as a ghost.
I'm telling you.
I mean,
I was mortified.
The level he was mortified was palpable. I mean, his jaw nearly hit the floor. I mean, it was like somebody just told him, like, it's like he just watched his dog get killed.
I'm telling you, it was
to that level.
That level of emotion for me, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, what? And he's like, well, no, it's no big deal, this and that. And I'm like, no, we sent you one. I had to have sent you one. And he's like, I never got it. He's like, it's cool. Like, don't worry. And I'm like, no, it's not cool. Like, that is a big thing for me.
Yeah.
Like, because for you to be here tonight and for you to come and do our On Tap and everybody that trusts us with their story or trust us with their interaction, I want them to really understand the appreciation level we have for that. Because one, we're new at this. And for us to do what we do, it takes people to believe in us to do it. And so when somebody like yourself believes in us, that you're willing to sit here tonight and tell your story, it means the world. And so, I didn't know from day one, like how to really thank people for that. It's easy to say like, hey, Nick, thanks for being here tonight. I appreciate it. You go home. But I want a reminder of that. And so we personalize the tins. We write on the back of them and so on. So when he told me that he didn't get one, and this was, so the on tap was in May, and making a stretch was what, October?
October, yeah.
Right? So October, he tells me this. This is last October. I was mortified. I really almost fell off the bar stool. And then I tried to convince him that I sent him one and it got lost. I'm serious. Like, because I was like, there's no way. There's no way.
So then I get the
It's in the mail.
So then I get the text message a couple of weeks
What
later.
was that?
It was like, bro, I didn't send one. He's like,
I'm so sorry.
he goes, I'm so sorry. It's
mortified.
he goes, you're in the next batch. It's coming.
I was mortified. He's like, don't worry about it. And I'm like, no, man. Like there's a couple things like this whole thing has gotten so crazy that like there's our days that I'm scattered with trying to make all the connections and trying to manage all of it, outside of everything else in the world. But the tins are like an important thing for me. And so we usually run batches of like 10 at a clip, and then I send them out, and I can't believe that I missed yours. And so when we were sitting, I'm telling you, when he told me that, man, I could only imagine what my face looked like.
I thought you were gonna puke.
I
was like, is it the drinks or?
oh my God.
Yeah, it was that level. So I'm like, oh
Nice.
wow, like I struck a chord. Yeah.
Listen, I got nothing else. All I have are those tins, man. That's all I got. So, but it was tough. But I thank you for understanding and dealing with my lack of thoroughness on that one. But you did get it.
I sure did.
Okay.
It's in the office. Yeah.
Cool. That's fantastic. It's just it's a small token of our appreciation for you. And I think, let it symbolize what you do for the fire service. On the back of it, typically I write like keep tradition and culture alive and, things like that, because I think that's super important. And what are you laughing at over here?
On this one, he wrote, sorry, I never sent it to you.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah.
Keep the rains coming, stuff like that.
But I will say that despite the torrential downpour, we still managed to fill up the joint pretty well.
Yeah. It was a good show.
Let me tell you, we are very fortunate with our on taps, and we're very fortunate for the friendships that we've made and the following that we have, and the support that we get. And so it's I think it's because of guys like you that allows us to have a following and allows us to have people trust in us because we get to bring on guys like you. We've had a lot of guests on. I mean, Seb, how many episodes have we done now? I mean, thank you. Over 50. I mean, so we've had over 50 different guests in 3 different studios now in 2 years, and so on.
Plus the department visits,
plus
the
all
sidebar conversations.
All of it. But it's because of, I think, everybody is why this works. You could replace the 3 of us tomorrow and Sebi tomorrow. Well, not Sebi. Sebi's the smart one. You could replace the 3 of us and put somebody else here, and the platform would work, and it would work well because of our guests. So thanks. I mean, thanks for trusting us. Thanks for driving 2.5 hours tonight to get here. Hopefully your ride home's not going to be that bad. But I cherish this, and we talk about it all the time. These experiences, you can't fake them, and they mean the world. And so when you come away from the firehouse and you had a good tour or a good fire and good camaraderie, changing bottles out, or a quiet night, but you have a great storytelling with a senior guy at the table, it's the same feeling. It's just that good. So I appreciate you being here tonight. Sorry I screwed up on the tin. We'll make up for that, though. And but anyway, thank you.
It's my
you're
pleasure.
always welcome back. Good luck at FDIC.
Appreciate that.
Good luck with your double secret probation project that you're working on.
Yeah.
And I think it's great, and I'll be the first one in line to get it. So looking
Appreciate
forward
that.
to it, brother. So thank you. Guys, thanks for following us always, National Fire Radio, man. A little sappiness towards the end there, but I don't know, a couple beers in, maybe that's why. But what are you going to do? Nick, thanks, brother.
All right, my pleasure.
Appreciate it. Guys, for Tucker and Robert and myself and Sebi, who does all the magical work behind the scenes, Thanks for checking us out. Check out the next episode and give us that 5-star review. We appreciate it. Have a good night.
That was great.